The Law Be With You podcast show, also known as Christian Fandom Geek on YouTube, is now part of the Red 5 network. Red 5 is a network of podcast shows aimed at bringing great quality content, especially Star Wars. And so look forward to some awesome collaborations on the Red 5 network with the Law Be With You podcast show.
There's one. Set for stun.
Brilliant. That's awesome. Now, another lantern, and that is really, really famous, and we have had a chat about this before as well, is John Stewart.
Yeah.
Tell us about him and why he's such an important character within not only Green Lantern as a comic book, but within the sort of genre of comic books and fandom in general.
Well, John Stewart as a Green Lantern was actually the first black superhero that DC ever had. He also was, he took the mantle off a white character and kind of took that forward. It's quite interesting, the history of not just him as a character, but how his character was created and how he, what was the kind of political kind of, idea at the time.
Yeah.
At the time, this was in the early 70s, Green Lantern wasn't actually doing well. As a comic book, it wasn't selling well. Also, the Green Arrow wasn't either. So what they did was that they put them together. So okay. Green Lantern and Green Arrow had their own comic book that they kind of co-starred in. And,
wow.
And one of the writers, which is the guy who created John Stewart, Denny O'Neil, he wanted to use Green Lantern and Green Arrow as an allegory for different political views. So Green Arrow has always been known as quite a liberal character and always has kind of a liberal view on superheroing, while Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, he was always known as more of a conservative.
Okay.
So they actually had a storyline where they were having a road trip across America where they were tackling things, but seeing both sides of the kind of political spectrum. And there's a very famous comic book. There's two famous comic books in that run. There's number one where Speedy, which is Green Arrow's sidekick, he gets, it's a whole storyline about him actually being hooked on heroin.
Oh my gosh. Whoa.
Yeah, which was, it was a seminal comic book because
that's out there. That is really out there.
It was like one of the first anti-drug kind of comic books. So that was one thing, but there was another one where it's a very famous scene where, Green Lantern, sees this black woman and this black woman says to him, "You say blue people, yellow people, all these aliens all over the world, all over the galaxy, but you don't say black people."
What?
This is in the 70s, and that moment, Hal Jordan, he was shocked at this black woman saying it. So you can see where Denny O'Neil's kind of head was at, and I read an interview with him where he was like, they were talking about actually kind of replacing Hal Jordan for a bit as the Green Lantern. Yeah. And he said it wasn't even a political idea of bringing in a character like John Stewart, a black character. He just said it just made sense. Especially when the way that they were kind of pushing the whole idea of the Green Lantern and Green Arrow and kind of using that as an allegory for the politics of the day. He said that it just made sense that would be the successor to Hal Jordan at the time. So that's how DC got their first black hero.
So that's a really powerful thing. And I'm glad you said that, Omar. So when you get some groups now, because obviously there's a lot of talk of Henry Cavill being replaced potentially in the new Superman film that J.J. Abrams is directing and writing, I think, as well. Or maybe co-writing. And there's talk of a black Superman and race bending the character now. There's been a bit of a, kind of outcry by some of the groups that are in fandom that are saying, well, why are you race bending Superman? Henry Cavill's a great Superman. Now, I'm a Henry Cavill fan. I think you like Henry Cavill as well. So there's no issue from us with Henry Cavill. And especially as a Brit as well, we love having a Brit as Superman. That is like, we're British guys, and we want a British man as Superman 100%. But in terms of the concept of race bending and whatnot, you're really stating the case that actually, when you look at something like the Green Lantern and whatnot, you see that identity politics plays out in comic books. So when, say, a group like Geeks and Gamers might complain about them having identity politics and changing things around, you're basically saying this is part of the history of comic books.
Yes.
That it's part of the franchise.
Yeah. It has been. As I said, we have John Stewart as a Green Lantern in the 70s. We have James Rhodey, who's now War Machine, but he took over as Iron Man. I mean, even Thor was taken over by Beta Ray Bill and also Jane Foster. So that's like gender bending. I mean, even Loki, not just going into race, but Loki has been a woman.
No way.
Yeah. There has been a time when Odin turned him into a woman. So like these things, like all these characters are malleable. Like it doesn't really change things. And I mean, there has been as I think we've spoken before, there are different universes where Superman is black.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not something ad hoc. It's not just a kind of contrivance just for the sake of, I mean, maybe the way that they're doing it at DC now, I don't know how they're going to do it, how they're going to play out. But from the law and from the canon, you can make a strong case that actually it's very coherent to the narrative that you get in comic books. Mm. They do push boundaries. They do change characters around. And actually it is part of the paradigm. It's not just a kind of new modern fad.
No,
necessarily.
It's not.
I hear what you.
I mean, if you look at the X-Men, I mean, the X-Men originally were 5 white teenagers. And then in 1974, when John Starr's X-Men came out, they changed the X-Men fundamentally to characters from all over the world. I mean, if that happened now, I'm sure that there would be elements of fandom that were saying that it's just playing to identity politics. But it actually turned to a franchise that was the most popular franchise for over 20 years.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. There is this sort of thing within the fandom of, oh no, not identity politics, because I guess we've kind of spoken about this on the podcast. To be fair, it's played out in Star Wars, for example, in a way that hasn't always been great.
Yeah.
And so when they're seeing it in Superman or Green Lantern or any kind of thing like that, there's a kind of like, oh, not identity politics again. And people have different views of identity politics. I think we both 100% agree in diversity and that diversity is so important. Representation really matters. But how it played out in Star Wars isn't great. But we may agree or disagree on that, and certainly we can both understand, and I think our audience will understand as well, that within the comic book realm, it's very normal. This is like what comic books are about. They are very political. They do have, I mean, I think I remember you, Omar, talking about Captain America and the story with him, which was very political.
Yeah. I mean, Captain America issue 1, the cover of it, it's a very famous cover, is Captain America punching Hitler in the face. This was months before the US actually joined World War II. This is before Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
So, like, please tell me how more political can you be? You have the All-Star Squadron in DC, which were the superheroes that actually went over to fight in the European theatre of war. You've got the Invaders, which is when Captain America, Bucky, Namor, and the original Human Torch were all fighting in the war. These things have been happening. We've had very famously, after the towers fell in September the 11th, we had The Call, which is when the superheroes were helping, with the aftermath of the falling of the towers. We had a comic book about that. Where especially when it comes to the basic ethos around Marvel, it's always been about the world outside your window. It's always reflected what's happening in the real world. So, like to have that as your base ethos for the whole universe, and to say that can't be political, that doesn't make any sense.
I hear what you're saying. It's a good argument as well. Okay, so there was a Green Lantern film.
Oh gosh, yes.
And you know this is coming. Ryan Reynolds. Now that film went down like the Titanic.
Yeah.
What did you think of that film? And why did it go down like the Titanic?
Well, I got a personal story with that. That's basically karma on my side.
Okay.
My younger brother is a massive Batman fan.
Yeah.
And the joy I had after watching Batman and Robin on how awful that was for his favorite character. So the karma came back when Green Lantern came out that bad. It just completely just missed the point of what I think what made Green Lantern great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Law Be With You podcast show on Christian Fandom Geek. I really appreciate every one of you who listen to the show via podcast player or on YouTube as Christian Fandom Geek. We're also on the Red 5 network as well. Really appreciate all of you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this awesome project and enterprise. I've got some great collaborators on the show as well, having some awesome episodes, and we're really glad that you are part of the ride. Keep listening to the show. Also, you can follow the show on Twitter. If you put in the Law Be With You podcast show or Law Be With You, it will come up on Twitter as well. So if you want to interact with the show, leave a comment and leave a suggestion for future episodes. Would be really happy to engage with you as fans of the show. Keep safe, and we'll be with you very, very soon on the Law Be With You podcast show.